Hi everybody, my name's Tim from Fiorucci Fabrications, here again with Lowbrow Customs, and I'm going to be showing you how to modify your Ironhead Sportster frame using a new 52 to 81 hardtail kit from lowbrowcustoms.com. Okay, so first off, I'd like to talk about what makes this frame great. For starters, it's made in the United States, right here in Cleveland, Ohio. The frame geometry has been modified a little bit from stock. It has a 4-inch stretch and a 2-inch drop, which is the look everybody wants. It's your classic chopper look as far as the stance and geometry. So let's start at the front of the frame. So the backbone is 1.5 inch tubing. The lower frame rails are 1 inch, which are the same size as your stock frame. So after this is fit, it'll be a smooth transition, no steps or anything like that. The slug that's sticking out of the backbone is hollow. So it allows, after this is all fit together, we have a hole in the backbone all the way in the rear, so you'll be able to run your wiring from back to front without having, like all internally through your frame, without having anything hanging down below visible. It can all be hidden. The slug's rosette welded in, and you also need to rosette weld it on the other side of the backbone. So after it's welded in, the slug makes this butt joint super strong and sturdy, and it'll also help line up the tubes so that you don't have any kinds of step for the tubes not mating perfectly once this thing's fit together. And also you have the basically the same thing going on the bottom frame rails, where you'll also need to put a rosette weld on the other side. And after it's welded, the slugs act to help strengthen the tube at that weld joint and line up the tube so there's not like a kink of if you don't make the tubes up properly. So the rear motor mount is a super beefy, modified tab and slot construction. It's made up of a lot of 1/4 inch thick plates that have all been TIG welded together on the seat tube. They have standoffs built into the motor mount, so after you get your frame painted, they have a nice surface so you can clean off your paint easily to have the metal just made up directly to each other. So after it's torqued, there's no kind of paint or powder coat to smash and get loose over time. So that kind of stuff is important when you bolt your bike together, and this just makes it super easy. So this hardtail kit comes with a top motor mount that you'll need to install after you put the motor in the frame. When you cut your frame to the dimensions supplied, they will be actually cutting off your motor mount off your stock frame, and we won't be using that. So it comes with one that you're going to install after your motor's in the frame to perfectly center it between your top end. Another cool thing about this frame is that it comes with a gas tank mount for your stock gas tank. So after you modify your frame and you put this hardtail onto your stock frame, you can bolt your gas tank right on this bike, and then you're just another step closer to finishing it. So another thing about the lower rear motor mount is that it already comes with 2 holes set up for a battery box mount that bolts directly to this, and also has an integrated rear fender mount. And we'll just bolt together in these 2 holes, and it has existing holes to accept a battery box, whether it's kickstart or electric start. And this thing's just, the construction of it, the mount also acts as gusset for these tubes. As well as being gusseted at the bottom, we have 2 gussets at the top, which just makes this super strong and beefy. And depending on what kind of seat you run, it might also be a nice spot for the seat forks to slip under, as you've seen in a lot of chopper seat designs. The rear axle plates are really nice. They have these standoffs for your axle, which after your bike's painted or powder coated, it gives you a really nice surface to clean off the paint. So when you're adjusting your chain back, it's not gonna gouge up all your paint and bubble it up. You see on some choppers where they don't do this, and it's just really smushed all around the axle plates. So it's really nice that you're gonna be able to clean that off and really give you a nice surface to not have all that paint just smearing all over the place on your axle plates. So these axle plates are set up for disc brake because there's no mount for a drum brake, and there's also no crossover in this frame. So since the axle plates are mirrored left and right, they're set up for disc brake, and they're also set up for a 3/4 axle. So when you get the axle adjusters, they will be stock style Sportster adjusters, but for a 3/4 axle, because they have a tab on the back of the axle, so they pull back just like a stock bike and give it a nice clean look for your chopper. Speaking of brakes, it also comes with a weld-on tab for your disc brake, because depending on what kind of brake that you're going to use, the mounting location could be a little different forward or back. So we provide this for you to weld on when you're mounting your disc brake caliper. And It also comes with all the hardware that you're going to need to mount your motor into the rear motor mount, because the motor mount location is smaller now that it's plate, and it's not like those cast tomahawk pieces. So first things first, you're going to need to measure where you're going to cut your stock frame to fit the hardtail. We are going to be looking at a couple reference points to measure back from. So the first one's going to be your front gas tank hole, which is located on the neck just below the backbone, this hole right here. And then the next hole is going to be the low front motor mount location that's in line with the down tube. We're going to be measuring back from this front gas tank hole 6 7/16, and the measurement is going to be parallel with the backbone. On the lower frame rail, measuring back from the low front motor mount hole is going to be 14 3/8. If you've never done this before, I would suggest that you cut it a little long, just so that when you fit this together, you can make sure everything fits right, and then trim off any type of length that you need, because it's better that it's a little long than a little short, and now you have gaps to fill. Some of these frames are going to spring a little differently from when they're manufactured. These are really old frames. They've had stress in different spots. It's just better to cut it a little long, fit it up, and then cut it down to size. Okay, so after you have your measurements laid out, you're gonna end up cutting your frame, and it's gonna wind up looking something like this. All right, so let's put these together. Helps if you put the backbone in first. Then we can kind of wiggle these into position. All right. I'm really liking the gaps we got going on. Everything's seems to fits really nice. Now we kind of get this out of the way for now. We're going to lay the motor on its side and mount it in the frame. So the point of putting this motor back in the frame is we're going to use it as a fixture for lining everything up. Since I imagine you probably don't have a frame fixture at home, this is the next best solution to getting everything lined up and making sure that your motor is going to fit in after it's hardtail. We get this bolted up. We're going to put our through bolts in first because you can wiggle those. There we go. Then try to line up your threaded ones. Just kind of get them started. Okay, now that we have the rear motor mount tight, we're going to prop this back up and fit the front motor mount plates into position. First off, we're going to just bolt the front plates on without the motor spacers, just to make sure that we're lined up nicely in the slotted holes in the front of the plate. Okay, so now we can see that the hardware is in the front of the slot, meaning that this tube should actually go this way. So I'm expecting to see a gap down below, which we do have. You're going to want these to kind of line up more so in the center of the slots, but just the fact that it goes in, it will work. And then another thing that you should check is the gas tank mounting locations. From here to here, you should set your gas tank back up top and make sure that's also going to fit, to make sure that the length of your backbone is correct. So we have your gas tank. This is just a stock Ironhead gas tank. We're going to use just to verify the length of the backbone and that this is just still going to mount up nicely. Okay, and that looks good. And so we're not using the gas tank as a fixture. This is just, we're just verifying length of this. Okay, so I just gave it a couple quick taps at the bottom and I closed up the gap on the bottom of the frame. As you can see, the gap closed up from where it was previously, and I really like where the bolt sits in the slot of the front motor mount plate. So we're gonna go with that. I'm going to just tack everything just a little bit to set the length, and then I'm going to torque everything down with all the proper spacers, and then we're going to weld it up. As you can see in some of the clips, there was a little bit of gaps in different places, and the gaps are actually good because it'll help you get penetration. This backbone is actually, it's almost touching. We probably got a 1/16, which is good. 1/8 is probably the best for gaps because your welding rod is going to lay in really nice. Gaps are okay in this situation. It's almost preferred to have a little bit of distance so you know that you're going to get full penetration rather than if they were butted up. But also keep in mind, too much of a gap is not good. So I would try to probably shoot for the 1/8 inch range, or we have about a 1/16 here, which is really nice. Okay, so before I get to tack in, I like to put a nice parallel across the top of the backbone. And as you can see how lined up we are, where the backbone of your original frame and the backbone of the hardtail frame come together and they're not bowed or there's big air gap in between the parallel and the backbone. It looks good and we seem to be lined up really nice. So I'm gonna actually clamp this parallel to the top, which will just add as additional support when tacking this together, just to make sure that the tubes stay lined up. It's just kind of like another fixture, and it's good to do when you're lining up any kind of tubes, just to keep them really nice and straight. Make sure it like opened up just here. Okay, so I'm going to tack on both sides of this, and then I'm going to actually move my straight edge to make sure that I'm lined up left and right and not just up and down. A lot. All right, let's tack that into position. And I'm just putting on little tacks just to help line everything up because we still have to actually bolt in the front of the motor. But we're trying to set the length of everything because sometimes it could shift, and you want to go into position. So we're still in the center there. We got the backbone tacked. So I put this thing up on some blocks and jack just to raise this up and give me access to when I go to weld up the bottom frame rails. But before you do any type of welding or tacking, slip the front motor mount into place and get that all nice and tight so the motor acts like a fixture as you're working. So the spacer goes on between the tube on the side of the actual motor mount plate, not to the tube itself. When using these washers for the front motor mount on your Ironhead Sportster, the washer is actually to take up all the slop that is in the slotted part of the front motor mount. It's so the tube doesn't smush over and go inside the slotted piece. So just make sure that you got that in the right spot, and we're gonna snug everything up. Okay, now that everything's tight, you want to just visually inspect some spots and make sure there are no gaps opened up. So now that we have the front motor mount in and tight, I'm going to tack the bottom frame rails, and we'll add the top motor mount before we weld everything up, just as another fixture point to keep everything really nice and straight. So going to get the bottom tacked, and if it's spaced up, don't forget to put your ground on there. All right, now we go. Wear gloves, kids. And as you can see, we have a little bit of gap, but that's really okay. When I actually weld this together, it'll seat in there real nice. Okay. For the top motor mount, you're going to want to use the one that you're going to use for the actual project. The one I'm bolting on right now is a gas box, stainless, top motor mount that also mounts your key switch and coil. And this one is also available at lowbrowcustoms.com. So we're using the gas box top motor mount to mount the motor mount tab that the frame actually comes with. As you can see that the tab is actually slotted, so you have a little bit of adjustment front to back. So when you're putting this on, you're going to want to mount it nicely between the rocker boxes. You don't want to favor one side or the other, so you just have to pay attention to that. Because it's slotted, it can be off to one side. So just pay attention to that as you're mocking this up. Another thing, you're going to need to use a couple spacers just to close the gap. And we're just using a couple washers just to get this thing bolted on nice and tight while I weld it up. All right, that looks pretty good. Okay, as I just noticed, the tab has a little bit of slot, and you want to make sure that the tab is parallel to the top tube. So it's not a bad idea to look down from the top to make sure that it's not twisted in a way. And this one is just ever so slightly, and I just tapped it just to line it up. And it's not the most critical thing. If it's a little off, it's okay, but this is just details. So. Now I'm happy with how this is sitting. I think it fits nicely inside the rocker boxes in that space with the top motor mount, and I'm happy with it. I'm going to tack it on, and then we're going to just proceed to weld this thing up. Okay, so let's get the top motor mount tacked. I switched to bigger rod for this. I have a little bit, it's a thicker tab, and I have a little bit more space to fill. And the bottom, I'm gonna start with the bottom first. This is a little tricky, it's a tight spot. Okay, and it's a good idea to jump around. You don't want to just focus and weld one spot fully. From this side. So now I'm going to take the motor out of the frame so I can weld up everything else that I couldn't really get to, and that'll be it. So let's get the motor out. Okay, now that I moved over to my welding table, I'm just going to finish this thing up real quick. You can see that I'm jumping back between size of the rod that I'm using, depending on the size of the gap in the frame tube. On the larger gap, I'm using 1/16 rod, and when it's a little tighter, I'm using 0.35. I think I've mentioned in a previous video, if you watched it, I like to use the 70S-2. I think it flows better on carbon steel than the -6, which has more silicon in it. I think it just welds better, dirty material a little better. But everybody's got their own preference. Any spot that you had a gap and you're a little low as far as how much you filled, you should try to just add a little bit more weld to bring it back up to the surface, but just as flush as possible. I wouldn't get too proud and get a caterpillar. Okay. Now that the backbone's flipped over, being a lot easier to get to the underside of it, spot where it was hard to reach inside the frame, with the motor in the frame, I should say. And don't forget to weld up your plug welds. I don't know if you can see, I sometimes like to pulse. I'm kind of all over the place. I pulse, I hold steady on the pedal. It kind of is really circumstantial to what I'm welding and maybe how comfortable a position I feel like I'm in. And that's it. Make sure you didn't forget anything. It looks like we're all welded up, and I'm actually gonna, you don't have to weld the motor mount spot fully, but I'm gonna close the welds and wrap them around so they don't just stop right at the edge. So just kind of weld on to the inside, just a hair everywhere. It adds so much strength. So now we got the motor back in the frame. The frame's fully welded. The next thing that you could do is put this thing up on some wheels and actually really start to mock up your chopper. Don't forget about the brake tab that it came with. If you aren't ready to actually mount your brake on your bike yet, which I'm not. It might be a minute. I'm gonna actually just tie this up just so I don't lose it for the future. So I hope you liked this video and found it informative. If you need any more assistance, you can always call us at Lowbrow Customs, or if you need any more parts to help build your custom bike, please don't hesitate to visit us at lowbrowcustoms.com.